Yeshua again returned to his primary headquarters of Peter's home in Capernaum on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. There he engaged in teaching his followers and disciples about the kingdom of God using many parables. His reputation was now such that huge crowds gathered around him wherever he went. Privacy was nearly impossible. Even while in Peter's house, there were multitudes of people gathered outside waiting and calling on the Master to come out and meet with them. One day, when evening came, Yeshua had a plan. Mark 4:35-36. On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. Slipping out of Peter's house after dark, Yeshua, along with Peter, James, and John, got into the boat that earlier in the day Yeshua had used as a speaking platform and set out to the other side of the Galilee, to the Gentile territory of Gadriyim. It would not be an easy crossing. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. Perhaps this is the one story where it would be appropriate to begin with, "It was a dark and stormy night." The Sea of Galilee is located about 400 feet below sea level in a region surrounded by high hills. High winds and stormy conditions are a common occurrence on the sea and often spring up suddenly, without warning, and with great ferocity. These sudden storms frequently rise up in the late afternoons and even at night in what otherwise appears to be calm conditions. The common fishing boats used on the Galilee were small, about 20 to 25 feet in length, and set low in the water to facilitate the handling of the trammel nets. While the three disciples handled the navigation of the boats, Yeshua slept in the stern when a sudden and particularly violent storm arose on the sea. Let's look at Mark 4:37-39. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Now Mark's description of the storm is rather like the storm described in the story of Jonah. Let's look at Jonah 1, verses 4-5. But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up. Then the mariners were afraid, and every man cried out to his God, and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. There are some striking parallels between these accounts. Both have the principal character asleep with a raging storm arising. Both stories have the sailors terrified and fearful of their boat sinking. In both stories, the sailors awaken the sleeping individual, who in both cases has the solution to the problem, and the storm is immediately halted. The sudden and miraculous calming of the sea terrifies both the sailors on Jonah's boat as well as Yeshua's disciples on the Sea of Galilee. The Master Yeshua arose and immediately rebuked the wind, and it became still. Now it's interesting that the Hebrew word for wind, ruach, number 7307 in the Strong's Dictionary, it means wind, as in breath, but it also is the same Hebrew word that means spirit. Yeshua uses the same words in rebuking and calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee that that very night he used to rebuke evil spirits. He commanded the wind to "peace, be still." In our modern way of thinking, rebuking a weather phenomenon in this manner makes no logical sense. Now, but in Jewish culture of the day, a storm of this nature was not merely a storm. The belief was that the spirit world manifested itself in the physical world. So in other words, the storm on the sea that night was a direct physical manifestation of a spiritual battle. It had demonic origins. First Fruits of Zion, in their work, The Chronicles of Messiah, quote the work of Rabbi Samuel Lax, who wrote a rabbinic commentary on the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are several Talmudic references to a spirit or demon of the sea, a concept that reaches back into Israelite ideas about Yam and Rahab and the forces of chaos that ruled the waters, and their correlation in Canaanite mythology. Yeshua spoke his rebuke, and the wind and the water fled. The very sound of his voice was enough to calm both the wind and the sea. The psalmist speaks of the power of the Lord to calm the sea. So look at Psalms 107, 23 through 30. Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters, they see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. For he commands and rises the stormy winds, which lifts up the waves of the sea. They mount up to the heavens. They go down again to the depths. Their soul melts because of trouble. They reel to and fro, and stagger like a drunken man, and are at their wits' end. Then they cry out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brings them out of their distresses. He calms the storm so that its waves are still, and they are glad because they are quiet. So he guides them to their desired haven. As Yeshua speaks and calms the wind and waves, he asks a question of his disciples in a kind of mocking rebuke of them. Mark 4, verses 40 through 41. But he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Had Peter, James, and John, Yeshua's most trusted and beloved disciples, having witnessed the multitude of miracles performed by Yeshua over the previous months, really lost their faith? Again, their reaction to the calming of the sea was strikingly similar to the sailors aboard the ship with Jonah. Look at Jonah 1, verse 16. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly and offered a sacrifice to the Lord and took vows. Unlike the fate of Jonah, whom the sailors threw into the sea, Yeshua's disciples did not throw him overboard. After the wind and the waves were calmed, they continued their journey across the Sea of Galilee to the area of Gerasenes, or in Hebrew, Gadriyim, to one of the cities of the Decapolis. They were about to meet another kind of storm. Let's look at Mark 5, 1 through 4. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains. Because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. No sooner had Yeshua and the disciples left their boat than suddenly a shadowy figure raced toward them from the tombs cut into the hillside near the shoreline. The scriptures describe a man as unclean, living in an unclean place, a graveyard, and possessed by unclean spirits. Luke's gospel describes him as being naked. Luke 8, verse 27. And when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time, and he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. His body would always have had open wounds because of his constant gashing of himself against the rocks of the caves. He's often heard throughout the night screaming and shrieking in and around the tombs of the hillside. The Gospel of Matthew has some additional descriptions, citing that there were perhaps two such men. Matthew 8, verse 28. When he had come to the other side, to the country of the Gerasenes, there met him two demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. This man, or perhaps two men, came screaming down the hillside from the burial caves when he spotted Yeshua and the disciples landing on the shore. Look at Mark 5, verses 6 through 7. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, that you do not torment me." The demonic spirits immediately recognized Yeshua, not only calling him by name, but recognizing him as the Son of the Most High God. He immediately recognized Yeshua's spiritual identity. This is the same reaction as the demonic spirit in the man found earlier in the synagogue in Capernaum. Let's look at Mark 1, 23 through 24. Now there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." In the typical exorcism, the evil spirits are cast out in the name of or authority of a higher power, namely in the authority of Yeshua as the Son of the Most High God. Later, the disciples cast out demons in the name of or authority of Yeshua, but in this case, we see a bit of a reversal. The demon requests that the exorcist, that is namely Yeshua, not torment him, as we see in Mark 5 and verse 7. What torture was feared by this demon? Did he know something of his ultimate end? Again, the Gospel of Matthew may shed some additional light on this. Let's look at Matthew 8, verse 29. "And suddenly they cried out, saying, 'What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?'" Now it seems that this demon, or more accurately several demons, know what is coming to them, and by whom or by whose hand it is coming. Now there are several accounts of judgment coming upon demonic spirits in apocryphal writings, as well as the canonized books of Jude, 2 Peter, and Revelation. The Master Yeshua himself spoke of the ultimate fate of the demonic spirits in the eternal fire which was prepared for the devil and his angels. We find that in Matthew 25, verse 41. "Then he will also say to those on the left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels.'" In the apocryphal book of Enoch, we find an interesting account where the Son of Man will judge the fallen angels. 1 Enoch 55, verse 4. "You mighty kings who dwell on the earth, you shall behold my chosen one, how he sits on the throne of glory and judges Azazel and all his associates, and all his hosts in the name of the Lord of spirits." Are these evil spirits on this hillside anticipating an appointed time of torment? Are they surprised to see the Son of the Most High God, the very agent of their torment and judgment, so long in advance of this appointed time? Now these multiple demons possessed this man, or perhaps two men, immediately recognized Yeshua as the Son of God and the one to be their judge. All demons know that one day Messiah Yeshua will send them into the lake of fire. The Talmud records an interesting take on this judgment. Satan said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the world, the light which is hidden under your throne of glory, for whom is it destined? And he said to him, for him who will turn you back and disgrace you and shame your face. He said to him, Master of the world, show him to me. He said to him, come and see him. When Satan saw the Messiah, he trembled and fell on his face and said, surely this is the Messiah who in the future will cast me and all the princes of the nations of the world in Gehenna. The encounter with this demon-possessed man was a kind of spiritual or demonic storm, not unlike the fierce windstorm Yeshua and the disciples had faced earlier in the night on the Sea of Galilee. In the previous encounters with demons, Yeshua had succeeded in exorcising them with little to no resistance. This time, it was a bit more difficult. This time, Yeshua demanded to know the name of the demon. Look at Mark 5, verse 9. Then he asked him, "What is your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now, how many demons were they dealing with here? A typical Roman legion consisted of 4,000 to 6,000 men. Obviously, Yeshua was not dealing with just one or just a handful of demonic spirits in this case. He had come across the Sea of Galilee into Gentile territory and was met by an army of demons. These demons implored Yeshua not to send them away into exile. Look at Luke 8, verse 31. And they begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. There was a nearby herd of pigs, approximately 2,000 of them, which the demons begged Yeshua to send them into. Let's look at Mark 5, 11 through 13. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us into the swine, that we may enter them." And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. Now once the demons entered the swine, the pigs immediately charged down the slope and into the water to be drowned. This legion of demonic spirits now had no place to go and departed from the area. This must certainly have left a lasting impression on Peter, James, and John. Did they see the bigger picture that was just presented to them? Here was an unclean man, a Gentile, who dwelt in an unclean place, the tombs or a graveyard. He was possessed by unclean spirits, who were in turn exiled into unclean animals. Perhaps the legion which occupied this man symbolically represented the Roman occupation of the land. Roman legions carried the symbol of a wild boar on their unit standards. To the disciples and to those following Yeshua, perhaps the exorcism of the demons and the destruction of the herd of swine was seen as a sign of the toppling of the Roman Empire and the liberation of their land. To the Jewish people of the day, they were actually seeking a conquering King Messiah to overthrow Rome. The disciples, and perhaps Yeshua himself, felt that this was enough of an adventure for one night. They got back in the boat and returned across the lake. In closing, let's take a closer look at Mark's account of this encounter with the man possessed by a legion of demons. Let's read again Mark 5, verses 2 through 6. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar off, he ran and worshipped him. As we examine this passage a little closer, we see a pattern emerge. We can begin to discern a common Hebraic poetic structure known as a chiasm. This chiasm is structured in 4 steps, walking inward to a central theme. Step A, we find in verses 2 and verse 6, with immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. Now moving toward step B, we find in verses 3 and 5, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs. Now step C is in verses 3b and 4b. And no one could bind him, not even with chains, and neither could anyone tame him. And the central theme, step D, is because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. The central theme of this chiasm teaches us that our own power will never be sufficient to tame the demons or evil spirits that populate this world. If we try to bind them in our own strength and our own authority, we will fail every time. In this account of Yeshua's and the disciples' journey across the Sea of Galilee, they encounter two exceedingly fierce storms, one physical with the wind, or ruach, and one spiritual with the legion or spirits, again, ruach. In both cases, we see that only the power of God through the authority of Yeshua is sufficient to quell the wind and the spirits. Yeshua is sufficient to deal with the little things, like healing a small child, causing the blind to see, and casting out a demon or two. But when the big storm hits in the middle of the night, were the disciples going to trust him? Are we going to put our faith and our trust in Yeshua to not only take care of our little needs, but when the major, unexpected storms arise out of nowhere, will we still trust in Yeshua's power and in his authority? I'm Dan Cathcart, and this has been Shadows of the Messiah. Shalom, and be blessed.